visual person, and actually for a long, long time, I've been interested. Back in the 80s, I got really interested in information inquiry. I was really concerned that our kids didn't have a passion for learning. They came to school, but they weren't passionate about learning. And I'm the kind of person, when I come out of a movie, I go home to see what are the facts of that, and what's the background of that history or the science. I mean, immediately my life, and Google is always at my fingertips because I want to find out about the world. And I was always shocked how many kids aren't really that interested. How many of you, and I don't care whether it's science or social studies, and I found out that a lot of kids just don't know that they can be. They've never had anyone to nurture them. It's kind of like living in a home with no books. You live in a home with no books, and you're not likely to read. And there's actually a lot of research that says if you're in a home without books, you're not likely to read. Well, I think the same thing is true when we talk about questioning. When we have parents who don't ask their kids to question, that don't give them those opportunities, often they come to school without that basic set of skills that we think of as part of us because of the profession we chose. So what I want to do in the next hour with you is to convince you that some kids are really drawn to certain kinds of inquiries than others. Some are drawn to text. And that's the reason I gave you your handout, because some of you love words on the page, okay? So for those of you who love to hold paper, old dead trees is what your real passion is, I gave you this so that you can have that, you can write all over that dead tree. If you would prefer, though, you can get the same information at my website. It's all electronic, so you can go back later. Everything that's in the handout, everything that's up here, all the links to everything that I'm sharing with you is on a web page. So we need to remember through this next hour that some people are going to want to run out and buy a Kindle because they're a text person. They love the text on the page. But for me, it's okay if I'm reading just text, but the world that I love is the world that has the video, the audio. I like the interactive books. I like color. I'm really drawn to color. Not everyone is drawn to color. And so when we talk about differentiating in the science classroom, but in any classroom, that's what I want to convince you of in the next hour. Visual techniques and visual resources and technology. So this isn't about how to use technology per se in terms of the how-to, but how to enrich what you do so that we can get kids that passion that we already have for teaching and learning. On the front page of your handout, you have the address right here, and that's how you're going to be able to get to all these resources. So just so that you can see that this is actually the case, this is the page, and over here you're going to see all these links. These are different sections, different pages in your handout. And so if I go down to the graphics page, these are going to be the first few examples, and you're actually going to be able to click on the examples and see exactly what I'm going to show you. Does that make sense to everybody? So the examples are there, and you can go back and look later so that you can kind of pay attention to what I'm talking about, but also be thinking about projects, and as we get into a few things, I'm sharing with your neighbors. So this is the world that our young people are growing up in. And if you want to find out more later, as I said, this is the first page of my website. These are all the classes I teach. My other resources, if you pick up your bookmark and you turn it around, everybody click on Activate. Oh, wouldn't that be cool? If you could like click on it and it would like go and you could, no, this is 10 cents, not, $10,000. But if you click on the Activate section, that is a master list of all the workshops, and you can get into this one there. I have a book called Graphic Inquiry that's coming out in the fall. It's all graphic novel style. So the whole textbook has no page with all text. The whole thing is graphic novel style. That does really what I'm going to be doing here, as well as some other workshops. So our world is filled with exciting visual techniques. How many of you would agree with that? There's tons of visual technologies and tools out there. Unfortunately, we don't always have access to those, but we need to have access. Yet many classroom inquiries are still very text-based. Now, that this is your assignment, the teachers you teach with. This may be their assignments. Because what I find is that you chose to come here today, so you're already excited, and you probably are already on your way. The key is how do you go to that next step with what you do. So we have the assignment the kids get that's on text. Then what they do is they go Google the topic that they choose because they just kind of randomly chose a topic because whatever, or they run up to, what are you doing? She's doing invasive species. She got an A on the last project. I think I'm going to do invasive species, or whatever my friend's doing, or tend to go that direction. So what I do is I go to Google and I just do a search for invasive species essays. What happens? 10,000 come up. I spend a little time figuring out which one has 2,500 words because that's what's required. I might have to cut a little of a paper to get it, just perfect. And then I just copy and paste. Now, I know none of your students do that because what they do is they change paragraphs around and change words around, and they still don't get that that's not what this assignment is supposed to be about. So the whole idea here is that we've already got these wonderful partnerships started. You guys, I had a great time going through all the things that you gave me, all these great resources and projects and opportunities that you already have. So how do we start building in then, based on what you already have, these things that are going to motivate our young people? Because we know they're motivated by graphic resources and tools, and it's not just the motivation part. A lot of it has to do with how you learn. A lot of it has to do with how you think best. Okay, I'm going to ask you, if I'm going to give you directions on how to get to the airport, how many of you want a map versus how many of you want the text written down? Now, I know it's your GPS.
We need them both.
Okay. How many of you want the list of directions? How many of you want the map? How many of you want both? How many want the GPS? Okay. And some of you are like, I don't know how to operate it, so I wouldn't know. So some of you are going to be like that. And so each of us is going to be different when it comes to all of these resources. So, what's for lunch? Turn to your neighbors and talk about what's for lunch. Okay? There's a little bit of a clue of what the 5 things are that are for lunch. Not a lot of information. So turn to your neighbor and talk about what questions you have based on these 5 things that are for lunch, what other information you'd like, what other pictures you'd like, what other things that might help you, what hints might help you, what you know, what you don't know. So turn to your neighbors and you're going to spend 1 minute talking about this. What are the 5 things that are for lunch?
You can have a threesome in the middle.
I can hear some of you go, you're pointing. Okay, so how many of you guys just thought that was kind of fun? Raise your hand if you thought that was kind of fun. Okay, now I could have started with a beautiful PowerPoint presentation. One of those standard ones that students have seen 10,000 times that said, cell biology, or understanding microscopic something, and the students are just already going, okay, and just something like this that gets people, oh, that's interesting. Well, I have questions. You don't just look at them. I have questions. You can't just look at something and just like miraculously know what it is. That's not what science is about. Science is about discovery, and it's about adding your prior knowledge to the information you have and looking for new information. So the idea, and this is just actually a single web page you can go to that has little descriptions under each, and you may have seen it's actually been out for a long time, but I wanted to use it as an example to get started. So is this a plant cell or an animal cell? Okay, now remember that pictures for the sake of pictures just aren't going to work. Okay, now on the other hand, if you got middle school students, they will find this hilarious. High school students will find it stupid. Is this correct? So middle school is very different than high school. What's stupid and what's funny? Now, of course, the middle school students will say it's stupid, but they will laugh. Whereas the high school students will look at you like, are you from another planet? What are you talking about? So knowing what visuals will really work, I think, is really important. So let me give you 3 examples of some things that we can start doing that are real easy things. One is to take students on virtual field trips. Whether it's virtual field trips using Google Earth to locations in the world, whether it's going to a museum, whether it's going to a lab site online, but taking students virtually to a place that they wouldn't be able to go to otherwise. This is at the Field Museum in Chicago. It's called the Underground Adventure, and it's actually really cool. You walk through what it's underground, what it would be like to be an insect underground and seeing all of these objects. Really interesting, but taking the perspective of a creature living underground and what that would be like. So changing both the kind of activity we do, but also the kind of product we require. So rather than write a paper about that, write a paragraph reflection. I can tell you I've graded 10,000 of those, and I don't really want to read anymore. So part of the reason to do all this is just for your sanity as a teacher. If you've been teaching for 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years, let's change up the assignments. Make them more exciting to grade, and it'll be a lot more fun for students to do. So rather than a paper, maybe we're going to share with the scrapbook page that we make. A single page, tell me about the experience that you had. Now, the quality of that is only going to be as good as the assignment that you make. In other words, what do you want on that page? Do you want to have scientific information? Do you want to just have, it was a good time kind of information? What is it exactly that the requirement is? So it may be that you present a visual problem, and then students are going to create a visual solution. So instead of starting with, and we do this in science all the time, starting with rocks, minerals, artifacts, objects, all these kinds of things. But instead of, in the end, we have to write up a paper, a paragraph, I'd rather spend that time maybe doing something else, and this is the end product. This is all you turn out, is the inside, and a sentence about your conclusion. That's all there is the lab report that I'm doing. Because I think often we try to do these big things, and then we don't have time for all these smaller things that we want to do. I'm not saying to take away from the great big project-based things, but what I'm saying is maybe sometimes to focus on certain things and really make sure that they understand a small piece that's part of a larger umbrella. Another thing to do is to look for other kinds of visual products instead of traditional written papers. Now that's not to say kids don't need to write paragraphs, they do. But they get lots of experiences writing paragraphs, especially in, elementary school, middle school, and high school. Comic Life, though, is something I love because it's so easy to use. This is one of the few purchase software packages I'm going to talk about today. It costs $20 for educators, and you can get it down to about $5 or less a computer if you buy them for a whole school system. It's like Inspiration. Are you familiar with Inspiration for making concept maps? I consider it's kind of, Inspiration was from the 90s, and this is from the 2000s. It's kind of the 2000s version of that in terms of a different way of thinking about creating something. So it's just a tool that lets you very easily make these kinds of graphic novel, comic kinds of things. So as we move into talking about graphic inquiry, I'm talking about weaving elements throughout the inquiry process. In other words, with questioning. How are we going to incorporate visual elements? Now that may be in your planning of the environment you're going to immerse your students in, or maybe designing it so students are going to discover those images as they go, because requirements are that you compare two examples of visually. Well, to do that, they're going to have to find two visuals or create two visuals to share. And using technology may involve students taking out cell phones that they don't have, because of course they would not bring them to school, but if they happen to have them, then taking their photos themselves, uploading them to Flickr, and then they can all see them. And that may have to be done after school, because you don't have access to that in school, or you have to get special permission for them to bring in their cell phones. But I can tell you, in a class of 30 students, 25 are going to have a cell phone with a camera on it. 5 won't, but that's okay because they're working in 2s and 3s, and it's okay if everybody can't get it to work. But there's always a way to do that, and then all of a sudden the project becomes exciting because it's part of their real world, not just part of the school world. So it's starting with photographs, it's starting with diagrams, and then it's starting to say, well, what's the quality visual content? Because one thing that can happen very easily is, I'm just going to use a bunch of pictures. Well, no, that's not enough to really do what I'm talking about. Just doing the first activity that I showed you, where we just see the pictures and talk about it, that's nice for brainstorming, but when we get deep into each of the 5 groups working on their project, there's going to need to be a lot more depth. So it might be investigating the interactives that are available online. The University of Utah has a great genetics online tool, interactive, that you might use to gather really quality visual content. So looking for experiences that have visual content. The second, though, is something that I think we can do a lot more of, and that is providing graphic context. In other words, a cell is a cell is a cell, but we're so used to it. When you see a cell, you see something more than the cell. Okay, you see something more than that. Students see a cell. Okay, that they're looking at it, and it's not a person, it's not an animal, it's not a plant, it's not a, it's just whatever. Okay. So how do we make that come alive? And that's by us becoming readers and educated in the general world. That's by reading science, reading nature, reading all those, and finding out what's popular. My favorite book from last year was The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. How many of you read this? If you haven't, it is riveting. I mean, when I say riveting, I mean, now, on the other hand, I really like The Emperor of All Maladies, and I find it riveting. Have you guys read this one? It's the biography of cancer. It was the Pulitzer in nonfiction for this year. Really cool. An oncologist said his patients were always asking about cancer, and he said he never could answer the kinds of questions they were asking, which was, well, I can't fight it if I don't know what it is and where it came from, and what have they done in the past? I mean, you can tell me about what they're doing now, but I want to know what led to the fact that I have to be in agony for 3 weeks. You know, what is it that led me to here? But your kids are not going to read this. Well, they might. Your AP kids, I would love to see them each choose a nonfiction book. And if you have an opportunity, look for ways to cross-fertilize with other subject areas. That would be a perfect way, if you've got a friend that's an English teacher, to do an AP class that's an AP Science nonfiction class, where the AP kids are reading a work of nonfiction, and then they connect with a science class, and then create a really interesting, as we say, context. Anyway, Henrietta Lacks is where you recognize this cell here? She died of cancer in the 1950s. They took her cells, rapidly growing cells, and now there are millions and millions of her cells in the world that are used for all kinds of cancer research and other kinds of research also. But you can read about her life, and the story is the reporter's point of view of spending 10 years of her life trying to find out who this person was. It's about her family, who never was really told how she died or never told she was part of medical research. Her family thought that like almost voodoo kind of thing was going on with her cells reproducing, and that they were living, because no one told her what they meant by living cells. They thought literally she was like living in another form. So really interesting, the book about this. But it gives a generic kind of a cell a face. And then we can go to Wikimedia Commons, and we can find all kinds of examples then that we can use to talk about this, because it's all in public domain. We can use a timeline to explore. Here's the original biopsy in 1951, and look at, these are all of the discoveries in science that are based on this. So a timeline for some students is going to bring that alive. For some it's going to be some other aspect. And then in the end, having students create a graphic connection to say, okay, we've talked about this one example, this one context. Now you provide the real world piece that goes with something else. A person, a place, a thing, a scientist, a patient who really made a difference, or a set of patients that really made a difference. And then we get into the understandings of medical ethics and issues and research from there. Students can create their own video, for example, based on historic slides. So I'm an inquirer. How many of you are inquirers? You have a passion for discovery and learning. Who do you think this is? That would be me. Yes, I never wore shoes. Anybody never wear shoes in the summertime? Yeah, never wear shoes in the summertime. I like to read all the outdoor adventure stuff. I like to fish. Check out the midriff over there. Yeah. Now it's going to be a while until I'm going to do that. And I can tell you that I use World Book Encyclopedia for all my reports. How many of you use World Book? Can you tell me what color your World Book was that you copied out? Okay, here's an actual pollution report that I did in 1968. Okay. And I can tell you I spent much more time on the cover than the rest of the paper because I wanted to draw pictures. Okay, no, they weren't great pictures. But I was drawing pictures, and here's my report because, of course, back then we didn't have word processors. But I had all of these pictures interwoven into my project. Nice dead fish. I had my references there. You know, it was a time that was, you know, the real beginnings, you know, the Clean Water Act, you know, in the early 70s. And, you know, I was really, pine cone eater, backpacker kind of girl. But I had that because I had parents who were really supportive of that. Well-educated parents, a teacher, my mother was a teacher who had that. So it was part of my lives. So what is your passion, and how has your passion impacted and nurtured what you do? And do you think that that's important? Turn to your neighbor for just a second and talk about that passion, and then we're going to get into a whole bunch of classroom examples. What's your passion? What's your history?
Mine has changed throughout my life.
There's zillions of of inquiry methods for different kinds of investigations that you're doing. But I'm also looking for that larger umbrella of, it's not about science, it's not about social studies, not about we're doing a historical investigation or whatever specific. There's also that just general overlaying, whenever you're excited about learning, what's the process to do that? Because not many of our kids are going to step back and come out of the movie theater after watching a World War II flick and say, oh, okay, I'm going to go through and which method am I supposed to use? Is that the one from social studies or is that the one for science? Or now, am I supposed to question or am I supposed to, yeah, no, they're not going to do that. Now, a lot of schools teach what's formally, when we talk about information inquiry and library science and technology, the big six. Are any of you familiar with the big six? For information searching, you know, you identify tasks, information searching kinds of things. You evaluate information, you know, that kind of thing. I created this back in a margarita stupor, I believe, actually, was what it was. No, actually, it wasn't a conference. A bunch of us were sitting around in the lounge after doing, you know, going to sessions all day, and we said, the problem is kids don't talk like that. Have you ever heard kids say, I think I'll synthesize now? I just don't think that's going to happen. And so I said, what I really need to do is make, I guess, some model. You can call it whatever. You can say, according to Dr. Lamb, you know, or whatever. But this is what I want kids to do. I want them to watch the world around them. I want them to wonder about things. I want them to start kind of creating webs of information. They get to that point where they're wiggly. You guys know when they're wiggly? They want to talk to, some kids who are interpersonal want to talk to people. Others don't want to talk to anybody. They just want to sit and think. Some people need shower time. It's that wiggly stage of, I don't know whether I need to go back here or I don't know if I'm ready to go here. And you're kind of like going like this. There's the weaving of information together. It's not a patchwork of, I'm going to copy my essay from 5 different places. It's the weaving of all this information because I want to incorporate all those different perspectives. It's the, I'm ready to tell somebody, how do I wrap it up to give it to somebody as a gift? Not, I have to write a paper, so I've got to go write my paper. You know, the down, this should be an up part. And then there's the waving, I've got something to tell you. The excitement of taking action, not just the, I've got to turn it in so my teacher can read it. And then there's the wishing I had done it different. I like wishing a lot better than reflecting in some ways, because that's what kids do. I mean, you tell them to reflect, but they say, man, I wish I would have done that. And next time, I'm going to do that. And I want to learn more about that. So I don't care what words you use. Danny Callison, who I co-authored this book with, created this model years ago that said, it's generally this. We have this recursive process of questioning and exploring that we do in our head. This is what we just kind of do when you come out of that movie and you're interested in learning more. There's the questioning, there's the exploring, there's the assimilating and drawing inferences, and then you end up back at questioning and exploring again until you get to the part where you're starting to put it all together to draw conclusions. And finally, you get to the point where you're ready to go down and reflect, and then go back and ask questions. And it's not a linear process, which makes it much more difficult, because you can't put it just on a sheet of paper and say, do this, 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 and this, which is kind of what this is, and what a lot of the other models are. So what that means is that we're going to have to start thinking maybe differently about how we build learning environments, where we put the kids in there and let them do the little, have you seen the new Lego spinner things? They're these little ninja guys. And you spin them, and they go like this, and you can build. But they spin all over the place, and whenever I think of that, I think about that. Because inquiry is a very active process, and graphics are often overlooked when designing these kinds of environments. But they can incorporate through the whole process. I'm photographing every stage of what's happening in the composter. I'm looking at my planting, and I'm looking at my maps. And I've got my charts, and I've laid this out. So it's both critical thinking and it's creative thinking when we talk about the use of visuals. So we've got this different idea, and what I'd like to do in the next 20 minutes or so is to talk about these kind of 5 topics. And if you've got your handout and you want to kind of follow along, I'm not going to be able to do everything this morning. I just want to give you kind of a feel for this. The first page we've already passed over. The second page is on questioning. There's a whole bunch of questions listed, and I'm going to kind of put them up here, but I'm not going to read it to you. You can go back and, if you want to use any of these or adapt them, do that later. So if you want to kind of follow along, also you can find across the top of the page the web page where you can find this and all the examples. So you can go back later. So I'd like to spend quite a bit of time talking about questioning, because for me, that's where the passion in learning comes from. are the questions, not the ones that we necessarily ask, but the ones that students ask themselves. Now, we may have to ask the questions to get students to ask the questions. You know, that very first example, I showed you the picture, and I asked you some questions to think about, but it's ultimately what they come up with that's often the most interesting. And a lot of teachers are reluctant to do that because they say, well, will that address the standard? Yeah, you know, kid, I mean, you're a good teacher. You can wander your kids back on the, I mean, it's the road less traveled is where we want them to be, although we know that eventually they're going to get back to the highway again. So how do we do that? And one of the pieces is to find those pictures that lead to interesting questions. So one of your missions is, and you can circle it, you can check it, one of your missions is to find pictures that ignite inquiry. Pictures that are interesting. It might be pictures that provide the context, the person who found the life of the person, not just a picture, but what's behind the picture also. Because what's behind the picture is really what tells us about the picture. So what is the question I'm trying to answer, the problem I'd like to solve, the key issue I'd like to resolve, why, how, what if, those are the kinds of things we're trying to get out of this questioning process. So how do you encourage students to ask deep questions rather than surface level? Well, one of the things I like to do, as I said, is to start with pictures. So I want you to talk to your neighbor and just create a list of questions you have about Egyptian mummies. What questions do you have about Egyptian mummies? What questions do you have?
Well, then all your questions
Okay, I want you to stop and I'm going to give you a little more information. Some of you are like, mummies? Well, that's out of nowhere. Egyptian mummies? That's kind of weird. Well, that's what your students think every day when they come in your classroom. Because they have not seen your lesson plans. I mean, they don't know what they're going to do. And all of a sudden, you jump in and look, today we're going to talk about, and they're like, now, of course, they could have read the textbook, and they could have looked at the syllabus, but they didn't do that, did they? No, they didn't do that. So when they appear, this is exactly what they're thinking. Well, yeah, but what's the context? I don't even get this, and what? I don't understand. Well, just by going and getting a start, all of a sudden, you got at least something to start with. So turn to your neighbor again and say, are there any, does this help any? Okay? So turn to your neighbor. Talk a little bit about these pictures, and do they help you generate questions? Or do they help you refine the questions you already had? Okay, if I get you to stop here for a second, because as I said, Stevie spent lots of time. I can tell you, though, that this picture right here is from the Vatican Museum in Vatican City, and I just saw it about 3 weeks ago. My son lives in Barcelona, Spain, and so I went to visit my son. And when he works during the week, then there's, well, I guess we could visit Barcelona, but we flew to Rome to explore Rome. It was their 150th kind of independence celebration thingy. But anyway, everybody else was rushing to go to the Sistine Chapel because you have to go through the Vatican Museum to go there. And you know, Larry and I spent the whole day. Oh, that's really interesting. Oh, they were closing by the time we got to the end of the museum, and everybody else was going. Psh, psh. But that's part of what we're talking about here. I want our kids to want to stop at every one of those and say, oh, that's cool. How did they do that? How are they in such good shape now? How do we preserve things today? How did they preserve things? How do they know how to do that? And where did those things come from? Now, it'd be cool to be there. Okay, it was really cool to be there. But I gotta tell you, if I gave you up close pictures, okay, not just these, but as we go one step further, and you start saying, ooh, I'd like to see him up close, or her, or I can't remember which. Anyway, you can go and look at, I think it's a her. Anyway, you can go and look up and find these pictures very up close if you want to. You can go to Wikimedia Commons, for example, which are all Creative Commons or public domain images. I use Creative Commons as my first stop instead of Google, because I know that if I want to publish it, I want to put it on the web, my students are going to be able to do that with no problems or issues. The other piece is to start looking for those things that are going to ignite those kids who are really hard to excite. How many of you have a percentage that there's nothing, I mean, you could stand on your head and the students would have no interest. They might be interested in the whole cat and dog mummy. Okay, I mean, what is the deal with that? Okay, I mean, those are the kids who are going to be, oh, now that's weird. That weirdness is the one thing that's going to ignite those one kids. And again, starting with that picture. Now, I could say again, cat and dog mummies, and that's going to kind of appeal to some, but seeing them, again, is a whole different thing. So I'm going to just kind of sprint through some examples. These are all at my website. So I'm not going to spend much time on them, and that's the reason I'm going to kind of fly through them. But, and I know you're saying, well, she's flying through already, and I haven't even, Okay, under question, you see what says question up there? Okay, this is what we were just talking about. See, mummies? Mummies are, if you go to Wikimedia Commons, there's a search for mummies. These are all clip art sites I like, information graphics that would be good starters, maps, photos, satellite images, multimedia, really good science videos to see. It's my favorite of every type of media. Because sometimes you say, oh, I really like my lesson, but I wish that I had some audio. I wish I had a visual representation, or I wish I had a video of that. So let me hit, what are these different things? If you want to write some ideas, the next page in your handout has these 4 areas. So as I go through and you say, oh, I hadn't thought of comics. Oh, I hadn't thought of, this might be a place where you could jot a few ideas down for some things that you might want to think about. Open Clip Art is by far the best Creative Commons public domain site for finding clip art. And you can do a search for pretty much any kind of clip art you're interested in, and you'll be able to find some. And again, what's so nice, a lot of websites have lots of junk along the side, or there's no advertising. Everybody who does them, and they are also SVG files, which is a open source. It allows you to be able to make them large or small, any size that you want. They're going to print out really well. There's also PNGs, which are also public domain format. But anyway, the formats are going to be such that are easy to use. Comics. I'll let you see the comics here. You make me sick when germ relationships go bad. Do those sweet-sounding bells seem like they're getting a little closer, or is it just me, natural selection? So, just again, a little comic might be the way to start. Again, remember that we talked about when they come in at the beginning of class, that may be the one thing that gets them started. Or it may be the one thing that asks a question that's much deeper. Is this really accurate? Is that what they're talking about? What is the word natural selection? Is that really? And so again, it may seem like a goofy little surface level question, but you can make it as deep as the questions that ignite the discussion. And I think that's the key. It's kind of like the animal cell phone thing. If it's just there to be goofy, I don't think it's worth the time. On the other hand, if you really want to talk, you can talk about, well, what is a germ relationship? What is a relationship? And what could you talk about that would be related to that? There is a great book. This is more of a middle school thing, but I can tell you your high interest, low reading level high school kids love this book. It's called How-Toons. It's a graphic novel. It's more related to creating inventions, physics kinds of activities. But on the website, they have 60, 70, 80 different experiments that you can do. Things like creating a hovercraft from a CD and a balloon kind of thing. Fairly easy kinds of things that you can do. But they're all one-page things you can print out in color. Gets kids really excited. I like to use them to have them go back and write about, for example, if you have a standard that's really dry, something you're doing with scientific method, and they have to be able to write down the procedure for this, or do something. Something really you think is boring, but you're not practicing for the test because we don't do that. But if you were to help them, that would be a way to get started. Diagrams is another thing. There are some great technical illustrators who donate all the works that they do to Creative Commons and Wikimedia Commons. Her name is Lady of Hats, is her name that she goes by. But if you do a search in Wikimedia Commons for Lady of Hats, all one word, she has dozens and dozens of these wonderful, really cool illustrations. Now you can even go to Wikimedia Commons to do a search for example, diagram. It'll come up with a master list of all the hundreds of diagrams. And you may have to go through to find, now you're not going to have as much luck if you're looking for a particular diagram. You're better off kind of go through the whole thing and seeing this goes with this lesson, this goes with this lesson, rather than trying to look for a specific kind. If you want a specific diagram, go to Google Images, and that's where you're going to be able to find zillions of life cycle examples that you could use. And what I like about these is every student has to find a different life cycle in the whole class, okay? Every student goes to Google Images, and their job is to find a different one. They have to go up to the board or the whiteboard and write down the name of theirs in a list. So they want to do it as fast as they can, so none screwing around. Well, I don't know which one. Well, you're just going to be left out if you don't get it written on the board quick. Then in 10 minutes, every student can have one. Okay, so it's a quick way to identify topics. Everybody has a different topic in their classroom, and they start with that life cycle. And their job is to get into small groups and do comparisons. And and then they have to get all the background information. The life cycle picture is just the place to start. Now again, you can do that with, here's a slip of paper. You get the mosquito. Here's a slip of paper. You get no, not nearly as fun as this activity, and it gives them that picture to get them started. Another is Google Patents. How many of you have used Google Patents? It's google.com/patents, and it's got every patent, every US patent. You can do a search for anybody. It's up to date. My brother-in-law is a chemical engineer, and he has like 30 or 40 patents. They're all, he's worked for various companies. There's 20 people's names on them, And so, but you can search for anybody you want, and their patents will all come up. Or you can trace the history of anything that you can imagine. I had a group of students who were doing projects on the Triangle Fire and whether it could have been prevented with different technologies. In other words, was the fire extinguisher invented in 1911 or not? What were the sprinkler systems like then? Some of those kinds of things. And they used this to get them started. Barbed wire, here's an example. Infographics is my favorite new one because everybody's making infographics. You're all familiar with infographics? Yeah. Infographics being not just a chart or a graph, but a whole poster that creates an overview of a concept using lots of different ways to talk about it. So it might be a chart, it might be a graph, it might be a pictograph, it might be a diagram, or it might be all of those. The first ones that became really popular were after 9/11 in USA Today. They had full pages of the Twin Towers, and here's the plane, and here's the plane, you know what I mean? With a diagram with a list of all the people and the firefighters, and everything was on that one page. Well, infographics are really easy to find because you just do a search for them. Do a search for bacteria infographic and see if you can find something. And you won't always find something, but you'll be surprised how many news organizations are now presenting information in different kinds of ways using tools like this. Here's one that I love to use with students. Who's not washing their hands? Really scary infographic. And this is only one piece of a much bigger infographic that has lots of different statistics on it. Another thing to think about is maps. There are lots of ways that you can use maps. It may be something as simple as I found a tick on my leg the other day, and I thought, I'm in Utah. I never really thought about it since I moved out west. Is that an issue? Is Lyme disease an issue here or not? And so the first thing I wanted was not like paragraphs of information. I just wanted a map to say, is it likely? And then I realized, though, oh, but nobody lives here. So maybe it's because there's no population, because, Salt Lake's got some, but maybe they're here. So all of a sudden, my little inquiring mind started going, and now I didn't, I wasn't really worried because it was still in the crawling stage. So, it wasn't real worried about it, but it was an interesting idea. And I've given you lists to maps. For example, the Center for Disease Control, I love to follow the flu map all winter. Cancer mortality maps. The EPA has great maps where you can find out what are the hazardous wastes in your areas. Again, a map would be a great place to start. Another thing to do and think about are overlaying any graphic on top of another graphic. When you overlay life cycles on top of life cycles, there's where you can start doing the comparisons. The actual sizes over the actual sizes of other things. Then you can actually physically see that. And especially for special needs students, that's really important because it's very concrete representation of what's the actual size of that item over another item. Another thing to use is Google Maps and Google Earth. This is an expedition to Antarctica where I can actually zoom in and walk around Antarctica. And it's just too cool. You know, I mean, I am actually there, and so I can actually look at the water, I can look at the snow, I can actually zoom in and see the snow and find out exactly when this was was taken. I can actually go on ocean expeditions now, because with Google Earth Oceans, I can fly underneath the ocean. Also think about photos. Flickr is some place that you're going to find zillions of, again, public domain Creative Commons, but there's also Wikimedia Commons. There's lots of others you can make use of. My suggestion is to start with US government collections, UK government collections, Australian government collections, Canadian government collections, because again, those are ones that students would be able to make use of. They're either in the public domain, or all you have to do is credit, because they're often a photographer who's working for the government, therefore theirs would be able to be available to use. And there are just hundreds and thousands of those images. So one of my biggest suggestions for this whole questioning thing is the idea of having a comparison. Rather than just having one item, think of multiple. Kind of like the what's for lunch? You had 5. You didn't have one. It was a whole 5. So you could pick, you could compare, you could think. There's a lot of the higher level thinking skills are going to come in when you have something to compare to, something to generate those questions. So turn to your neighbor and just talk about how are these two images different? How are these two images different? What are the feelings that they convey? What's the factual information related to them? Just talk about that.
The bars are around the people.
Okay, now I want you to create your own example in your mind. I call these dueling images. Okay, so one of the things to write down or think about or look for are dueling images. When you have two images that are like dueling against each other. It can be before, after, or it can be the middle and after, or the result, or a process product. It can be whatever kind of thing, total opposites. It can be historical versus today. There are hundreds of different combinations, but I want you to turn to your neighbor and give one example of something you could go back and look for 2 pictures of that, again, would start the conversation, because we're still on questioning. It would start the conversation. What images might you look for? It doesn't have to be anything that's light.
I envision like the
Okay, if I can get your attention back up here, then just a few more other examples. I've given you lists of all kinds of places to go for videos, because video is a subset of this whole discussion about graphics that also incorporates audio. There are webcams, live webcams. There are archived webcams that are wonderful to use. Another one you can do kind of like the life cycle activity is to have everyone go to the Cornell lab, and what their job is to pick a bird. Okay, and again, they only have so many minutes, and I'm up here, I run up to write up owl, and somebody else is writing turkey, somebody else is turkey. I don't think turkey will work for this, because he's a little black. But anyway, bluebird, jay, western tanager, whatever it is, and then you can either use the archival images for your activity, and what you can do is they'll give you the, so you can actually go through, you can see you know, the ages, you don't have weights and things like that, but there's lots of information that you can have in terms of the dates that are associated with this. Are they adorable or what? But there's cams for everything that you can imagine. Not just this, there's African cams, there's cams that are actually in labs that you can look at. And as I said, besides video, there's also audio. In the audio subset, students are very poor listeners. How many of you would agree with that? Very poor listeners. They're not used to listening. There's actually research that shows, and this is not graphic, but there's actually research that shows that when you show kids video, okay, they will watch the video, not listen. So if you ask them comprehension questions after, they will answer the questions based on what they see, not what they hear, in most cases. So that means using something like a Science Friday activity where they actually have to listen to that is a very good practice activity for them. And there are lots of these. I've got, as I said, I have a master list of these audio pieces. So, how many of you have read either Wicked Bugs or Wicked Plants?
It's on my list.
I'm a bookie person, so I love it. There's 2 books out. One's called Wicked Bugs and one's called Wicked Plants. They're written for adults. Very appropriate, though, for high school students. You could use some of the ideas in middle school, certainly. But let me show you a book trailer.
My fellow citizens, we are under attack. The enemy? Bugs. Are your kids complaining about uncomfortable, itchy skin? They probably have body lice. The diseases transmitted by body lice helped bring down Napoleon's army in his 1812 campaign against Russia. The lice lay eggs in the seams of clothing. If Napoleon had made his troops do their laundry, we'd all be speaking French today. It's summer again, time for that pesky summer cold. Or do you have malaria? If you've been bitten by a mosquito, you've already met the insect that's killed more people than all wars combined. Bites from mosquitoes made George Washington so sick that he took huge doses of quinine, which caused him to go deaf during his presidency. We've discovered that mosquitoes are drawn to people who have been drinking beer or exercising. Avoid these things at all costs. Do you have irritation and redness under your toenails? Chances are you have chigoe fleas, tiny insects that burrow under the toenails, lay eggs, and leave open sores. Don't worry, you're not alone. When Christopher Columbus and his crew landed in Hispaniola, they cut off their toes to rid themselves of the pest. So if you're ever vacationing in the Caribbean, wear shoes at all times. Do you ever feel a tickle in your nose? There's probably maggots in there. A Southern California man had 200 live maggots removed from his nasal cavity after a screwworm fly made one brief visit up his nostril. So at your next family picnic, be sure to wear protection. And now for the gardening report. It's time to plant your tomatoes and your summer corn. As always, you want to watch out for any dark clouds advancing fast on the horizon. It's probably a plague of locusts. In 1875, a swarm of Rocky Mountain locusts covered 200,000 square miles of farmland. Farmers tried to drive them out using poison, kerosene, and setting their fields on fire. One day, the locusts mysteriously vanished and are now believed to be extinct. But you never know. And inside the house, the bug situation is not much better. If you have books, silverfish are probably devouring them now. And if you have walls, termites are eating those. Coming up, the Department of Defense implants computer chips in caterpillars. A woman tries to murder her husband with tarantula pie. And millipedes invade small towns across Europe. After these messages.
And you can watch the whole trailer. It is just hilarious. And I gotta tell you, kids love to make trailers like this. Okay, so their job is to take the driest book that they can find in the library and to read it, to get all of the accurate information, and how can I best convey the science of that book, knowing that no one is ever going to read that book. In other words, knowing that they're not going to read it. Now, this is not just a book trailer. We actually want the accurate information. Another way that you can use this video, particularly, is to ask students to go through and just pick one of those and look for the factual information. Now, is that true that they all cut off all their toes? I don't know. You know, I don't know. Did Washington, was he was deaf toward the end, was that the reason he was deaf toward the end of the presidency? I don't know. And those kinds of fact versus fiction questions, are they associated with the disease? Are they not? Is this made up? All of a sudden, those kinds of things can be interesting. So the fact versus fiction questioning, I think, is really interesting. And the books are also cool because they're very, very short chapters. So students can easily you can have a group share the book amongst themselves and in just a few minutes read the background information that then going to serve the questions for their much deeper investigation.
When you're relaxing at home, you probably don't give much thought to the possibility of being struck dead by a dangerous plant. But there are criminals, murderers, and lowlifes of all kind in the plant kingdom. Some of them are in your own backyard. Sago palm. People love sago palms. You see them as house plants, and they're all over gardens in the South. You know, they're pretty, they're sturdy, and just packed with carcinogens and neurotoxins. In fact, this is one of the top 10 most toxic houseplants for pets. Dogs like to chew on the plant, but that'll cause seizures, liver damage, and, well, death. Oh, yeah. Well, monkshood. Yeah, that'd do it. Sure. Oh, monkshood. Looks good in the garden as long as you never touch it. It'll absorb into your skin and cause numbness and an irregular heartbeat. But swallow it and you'll be dead by dinner. You know, speaking of dinner, in 1865, a Scottish cook mistook it for horseradish and fed it to an entire dinner party, making everybody sick and killing 2 unfortunate priests. Oh, great. Oleander. Oleander? It's a nice shrub, except for the cardiac glycosides that cause vomiting, irregular pulse, decreased heart rate, and, well, death. In fact, there's a woman on death row right now who tried to murder her husband with oleander. It didn't work. He ended up in the hospital, but she finished him off with antifreeze. Those aren't the only plants with criminal records. History is full of horticultural homicides. White snakeroot killed Abraham Lincoln's mother in 1818, but not directly. Cows grazed on the toxic leaves and passed the poison on to people in their milk, causing a mysterious illness called milk sickness. Entire families died of milk sickness, never suspecting that a plant was to blame. Oh, then there's castor bean. The seeds contain a deadly poison called ricin. It was used by the KGB to assassinate communist defectors. And don't forget about the deadly seeds of the strychnine tree. In the 19th century, Dr. Thomas Cream slipped it to his patients. Dr. Cream died at the young age of 42. He was hanged for murder.
But just think of how, wouldn't that be much more interesting than handing a sheet of paper, okay, these are poisonous plants, you must choose one and write 3 paragraphs about it? No. Okay, this is a much more interesting way to get started. Now again, if you want to go deeper, we're still at the questioning phase. Data is another thing. I've got lots of links to data. I've got lots of lists to interactive kinds of websites. And this is from the Nobel Prize website. There are about 30 of these really great interactives for kids. And I have a master list of all these online games, the best online games. Rather than just using the games, my suggestion is to have students actually judge them, evaluate the games, and talk about the science. They can make screenshots of different screens and say, this is accurate, this is not. I don't think they go into enough depth in this. They're making this simplistic. What is it exactly they're doing with this interactive? Otherwise, it's just goof around time for students in the lab. Use visual stories, and that means not just adult and high school level books, but get out the children's books as the starting place, kind of like these books as the starting place, because students can get the background information they need. Then they can ask the higher level questions, because often students lack the background information that they need to tell the story of whatever that is. Another thing we talked about earlier is getting students to start with nonfiction reading as a way to get interested in whatever the topic is. And this is a great opportunity, as I said, to team with an English teacher also. Here are 4 of my current favorites. Examples that you might be able to incorporate. Pox is another brand new book. Guns, Germs, and Steels, a few years old, and Great Influenza is a couple years old too. And John Barry has some other good ones also. Another thing to do is to look for news stories. Museum at the museum website in Washington has famous photographs and has the front page of every newspaper, major newspaper in the world. And so you can see front pages of newspapers there. So there are lots of guiding questions you can use. Those are in the handout. We're not going to take time to look at all those guided questions, but the key is to how do you get that started then? And I've given you some things to help you as you're trying to design questions to go with these kinds of visuals. There's lots of ways you can use technology for background information, images that are recent, images and resources to get students to generate ideas. And then it also might just be a way to get started. For example, if you show students this, they're going to have questions and they're going to later want to take action. Okay? But they need to know the facts of this. When was this picture taken? Is this recent or is this one of the ones from the 1970s? The rings from the pop cans were very popular in the late 70s and early 80s, and a lot of the pictures we're seeing today are actually photographs that were taken 20 or 30 years ago. So is this still a problem, or is it no longer a problem? A great question for students. There's comics related to this. Is the six-pack rings of death, and other ways to use those. This is a great video called The Majestic Plastic Bag. Have any of you seen this? It is a mock documentary. Everybody know what I mean? A fake documentary on the life of a plastic bag as it migrates to the ocean. So it's like watching a documentary film on an animal, except unfortunately it's a plastic bag making its way to the ocean. So we spent almost our whole time talking about questioning. I'm going to go for about 10 more minutes or so with the other 3 sections, because once you get started with this, the same ideas are going to apply as it relates to different parts of the units that you're creating. In the book, How to Use Your Eyes, this is a quote that I love. Stop and consider the things that are absolutely ordinary. Things so seemingly meaningless that they never seemed worth a second thought. Once you start seeing them, the world, which can look so dull, so empty of interest, will gather before your eyes and become thick with meaning. It's that idea of getting kids to become observers, which is what science is really all about. So I've seen lots of images of snowflakes, but I've never really thought about what impacts their shape. So starting with a chart, starting with a graph might be something that would generate the quest for exploring information. It might be a virtual experience where you're exploring someone else's experience, but then asks you questions to go further. This is actually from a NOAA website where they have 10 years of investigations. Another thing to consider at this stage when students are exploring and they've got a topic, they've got their questions, and you're ready to jump in to the project is to create Pathfinders lists of resources to get them started. This is actually an actual quote by Darwin, by the way. If I really had as bad an expression as my photograph gives me, how I could have a single friend is surprising. You can actually read Origin of the Species on Google Books for free because it's in the public domain. There's a great website called The Grandeur of Life that has photographs from the naturalist, all of the people who are into doing the drawings and illustrations of the 17th, 18th, and 19th century. There's audio, there's video that you can watch. This is just all, you can get out the children's books, again, especially for your low-level people, or, again, the question of accuracy. Is this accurate? Are these actually the animals that were there? Are they not? Those kinds of questions. There's a graphic adaptation. It's not a graphic novel. They call it a graphic adaptation of Origin of the Species.
That's awesome.
So it's the whole, it's the whole thing, but it's in a format that your students can read. It's not archaic language, which, students have difficulty sometimes applying their way through. Start with this, and then they can go back and read the original text, and it will make more sense when they have the visuals to go with that. It helps them in understanding the text. It might be pictures, it might be diagrams from his journals. It might be the caricatures of the time. All of those things, if they can be collected and put in one place, it saves students a lot of time because they can concentrate then on their questions and get on to whatever it is that they're doing. I know Nancy's been using LibGuides. LibGuides is a service that provides a nice place for you to organize resources, activities, assignments very easily into one place. And there's lots of guiding questions, as I said, that you can use associated with this. And a lot of technologies that students can use to collect their own data at this point. So they've got questions, they want to compare the data they're finding online with their own data using things like SurveyMonkey and Zoho polls, where they're collecting their own information using Google Docs spreadsheet, where different students can be sharing their resources. Using, as I said, online information, in this case about the six-pack ring question, using information graphics. Remembering that this is a recursive process. Students are going to go back and ask more questions as they explore, going back and forth and back and forth. So the first surface level questions about mummies are going to come out, but pretty soon you're going to go into the questions about the preservation of bodies and what are the deeper questions related to that. So the next area then of our 5 areas is assimilating, confirming information, altering information, rejecting data, infusing new ideas. This is a project I did years ago with elementary school. We loved to go outside and draw dinosaurs in the parking lot. We put a VW bug in the middle and then drew all the dinosaurs on top of each other, okay? And to see how large they were in relationship to each other. Some kids need those physical activities to really assimilate, add to their prior knowledge, their understanding of a new idea. So I want you to turn to your neighbors, and this is something you're all familiar with, but think from the perspective of a student. You see these images, okay? How are they alike and different? What are the key elements? What are my questions about these? Because these are 4 pictures and they're different. And some students, when they see this in their textbook, they see it, and you give a different picture in the exam and forget it, because they've memorized the picture, don't have the understanding of the elements. So one of the things I like to do is to provide at least 3, I like 5, of the same thing. Now tell me how they're alike and different. Who built the best diagram? Who built the less detail, more detail? Is there extraneous information I don't need? Or does that extra information contribute? So turn to your neighbors and just talk about these 3, just for a minute. How are they alike and how are they different, and are those differences important? If I get a presentation up here, these are the kinds of detail activities that we can do during this exploration phase, because it starts helping us understand, do students really understand the concept or do they not? Okay, the first set of pictures were all about the idea of students creating the questions, because they don't know the answers yet. But now they should be getting the answers, okay? If they're not, we need to go back to that questioning and exploration phase if they get to this point and they're thinking, oh, the one in the textbook is round, so this is the correct answer, okay? This can't be it, because look at it, it's not exactly round. Well, they don't get that. I mean, they're missing something. Well, this has got extra stuff. I don't think we need those. I don't even know what they are. You know, well, then we have a problem. Okay, you know, well, these overlap, but I'm not sure if that's important, because this one doesn't, and I'm just not sure. Well, this is the time now to go back. And this is that reconfirming that we do when we assimilate. We take what we already know, we add more stuff, we reject the things that we're not sure of, but instead of rejecting right off, we need to go back and start asking those questions again. And again, this is where our top students got it the first time. They read the textbook, no problem. It's those students in the bottom half that rely on things like pictures without really understanding the pictures that we've got to get to, because they think they understand and they really don't have the concept. I also like to use what I call a trash and treasure technique to collect and analyze evidence. Trash and treasure means what's the trash in this image, what's the treasure in this image, okay? Or what's the trash in the evidence, what's the treasure in the evidence, what's important, what's extra, what's essential, what's not essential. And so as you start building your own diagrams then, which is in building my diagrams, not just labeling somebody else's, as I start building my own diagrams, I can start seeing that. The D's of evidence is something that Danny and I actually invented, so you're not going to find them anywhere. If you've got your list, you may want to, we're now on page, we've flipped a few pages here. We're on page 7. We call them the D's of evidence, and this is true no matter whether you're talking about science or historical investigations or whatever kind of investigations. So let's just start with a website, and this is how I like to teach kids about this idea. There's a great website in Canada. It's a national park at Banff National Park, and what they did is they actually took photographs of the process of what happens to roadkill, okay, after it's killed. What's that process? I mean, this is not just a fake thing. This is really what they were doing. So my question is, what should we be done with roadkill? What should we do? Should we leave it? Should we take it away? What should we do with roadkill? So we might want to leave the animals. Well, we might not. So here's the question. So D is discover new ideas. I've got my idea that we should leave the animal right where it is, but the D says I need to discover new ideas. What are other ideas? New ideas related to this. Discern is the second D. Discern the underlying thinking behind this. Is this just that I think they should leave the dead animals? Or maybe it's the needs of scavengers that I'm thinking of when I'm thinking of leaving the animal. I need to detect flaws and misinformation. Detecting flaws and misinformation, looking for those. For example, in this study, they actually dragged it off the highway because they didn't want it in the middle of the highway. So that does change things a little bit, because it's not laying in the middle of the highway anymore, it's off to the side. So that's something I need to consider as I'm thinking about, do I really want to leave all those animals in the middle of the highway? Do I want them off to the side, or whatever I'm thinking about? Deduce if this would work in other places. In other words, this is Canada. How is Canada different from where I live? There's scavengers everywhere, so the scavengers might be different. The animal is dying. We don't have moose. Well, I guess we do have moose, but not a lot of roadkill moose in our area. We haven't got a lot of elk and deer, but there's scavengers everywhere. And then divide and analyze conditions in different places. So think, okay, here are the different regions. Where would it work? Where would it not work? How would it be different? Different roadkill, different animals issue. Then dictate the themes, the patterns, the generalizations that you find. The cycle of life and death is something that we are looking at as far as this process. Devise arguments by organizing my evidence. Animals will disappear on their own. Why spend the money to go out? And we got the scavenger, so I start collecting this evidence as I'm creating my argument. But what I like about those D's is it gives students scaffolding for their evidence. And students have real problem. You say, well, collect the evidence and start writing, and they're missing, again, especially those low-level kids are missing help with what do I do with that. So I could do the same thing by applying the D's of evidence to these visuals here and the issue of smoking and whether we should mandate no smoking, should we have no tobacco, is it a choice? What does it always, do you always get lung cancer if you smoke? Do you sometimes? Are there other consequences, secondary? So there are all kinds of questions that you could apply to the D's of evidence. Another thing that can scaffold students at this stage are patterns. Things like giving students visuals or having them take their own visuals and have them describe based on the patterns, based on the pictures that they have. So that's like taking the anaphase, all the different photographs, and describing each one and what are the critical and extraneous kind of elements. A time sequence pattern is another thing you can ask students to do to make sure they understand. You might ask students to do all 6 of these to make sure that they really understand whatever the concept is. It might be episodic patterns, it might be generalization patterns, it might be a concept pattern, but having them actually show you that they understand based on one of these 6 patterns. And then, as I said, there's lots more questions as you're thinking about this. And I've also given you a lot more technologies, things like online calculators, converters, tools to help students organize, make concept maps. There's lots of technologies to help with that. There's a great one for the state of Washington. Are you familiar with this one? It's called Eco-Consumer. You can put in, I use so many paper towels a week, and it will calculate if everybody used that many paper towels, how many tons would be discarded each year. It's just a real interesting kind of an analysis that you can do. Just not real complicated, but it would be a nice beginning point, and then they could take something else and figure out based on how they did the calculations here, how that would work. And so I could take these D's and apply them to information graphic related to our 6th ring problem and other plastics in the ocean. The last 2 areas, one is infer, helping students make inferences. Everybody turn to your neighbor, and based on your knowledge of prickly pears and other animals, or maybe you don't have that background knowledge, what do you think took a bite out of us? Turn to your neighbor. According to the National Park Ranger, it is a javelina. Okay? So we might ask, how big's his mouth? What's the circumference? What exactly? How do we know? But again, it's that idea of, if you have nothing to go on, a picture is not very useful. But if you have the environment, you have other information, and then that other information is part of the student's learning and understanding the habitat in which that animal lives, and it all comes full circle. And again, I've given you lots of questions about evidence of a pattern. Examining photos, then making inferences, making conclusions, and sometimes it's just a really simple diagram that students make to share their understandings. Developing arguments, I've given you another big list of questions that help students do that. And I'm a junior CSI trying to figure out what caused the death of Mr. Lyman. It doesn't take long for middle school students to figure this one out. I think I conclude, but again, just a simple diagram to show my process and my thinking. I think I conclude, especially for middle school students, a nice basic kind of focus. But the idea, again, of using websites like the National Invasive Species Council website, then talking about over a series of years, how does the pond change based on how you handle invasive species. Working on the data from a previous year that's on Google. Google is a nice project because students can easily access other people's data. Or looking at something like forests and Forest Service methods of managing forests, and then exploring different perspectives on managing forests and wildfires is another thing. The idea then of making inferences based on different perspectives, different sets of information. I'm going to skip a couple here, but I want to talk a little bit about E.O. Wilson has been interacting. It's really interesting to see his interest in gaming and talking about the future of science being something where we need to share with the world. And it's not just about textbooks and print, but the gaming is a piece of that. And his work was used in Sim Ants. And so it's not just playing these computer games and using the computer, but creating persuasive arguments based on what you're reading about. I'm thinking that this is too simplistic, or that we need more information in order to do this. This would take more than 30 seconds that it takes in the game. Live games that students can participate on, and these are all at the website. And then creating convincing arguments for why you stand by this game, you don't stand by this game, you agree or disagree. It might be using Post-it notes. It might be just creating a very simple chart or a diagram. It might be taking a kids program and taking a digital camera and going out and looking at your school, taking data from your school. And then there's lots of technologies we can use. I do want to point out NOAA's photo library. An interesting project to do is to have students take a single photo and to have them crop it lots of different ways. Look at this photo and turn to your neighbors and talk about all the different ways that you could crop it to see different things in the picture. About that one. These are all that same photo. All from the same photo. So I can create a graphic novel page just with that photo, by just zooming in and looking at the detail. And it's a great example of observation, of things that you miss when you don't observe the whole picture, if you don't go in. The angles, giving students digital cameras and having them take one object and look at it from all the different angles. The top of leaves, the underneath sides of leaves, the underneath sides of the bark, the root system. Those are all things that we can photograph to really get an understanding of the whole thing. Combining, drawing. My husband likes to photograph, I like to sketch. We put them together and we have interesting connection. So having small groups, some working on diagrams, some sketches, each taking their own perspective. So again, there's a cycle of assimilating and inferring, just like there's that cycle of questioning and exploring. And then the last idea just is, I figured it out, now who do I tell? How did the project evolve? What did I learn? Who do I get to share this with? This is one of the projects from your own project here that I absolutely love, because it's taking photographs of objects, overlaying diagrams, and drawing on top of them. Those are things kids love to do with technology, and they really share their understanding. In this case, this is the lesson that we're talking about, but it could also be something students create themselves to share their conclusions. And by the more we as teachers can share exciting ways in our lessons, the more kids are going to be, oh, you mean I can take photographs? They're going to get much more excited about doing that themselves. So showing both the process that they went through in understanding the pandemic of 1918, and also the product of anticipating what might happen in the future. It's taking photographs of all the steps in the process. It doesn't have to be expensive cameras, photographing that process, and then using something like Comic Life to tell me about the process you went by to create your own ping pong catapult. Blogster is a tool for making comics in which you can embed video, audio, all kinds of things to share your understanding. Wordle is one, where this is all the terminology that's related to origin of the species and how many times each of these different words were used. Another Blogster photo. So I just need to real quickly end with one real quick example. So I'm going to take you through the whole process. We want kids to watch, right? Watch the world around them, watch TV, watch the world around them, watch the science around them. Get their iPads out, their iPhones out, download things like this is Al Gore's new book, Our Choice, which is an app. It's not a print book, it's created as an app. So it's interactive. I can read it, I can listen. It's watching a documentary. This is an award-winning documentary called A Sea Change, and asking, is this really going to be a problem? Are all the fish going to be gone? Giving students something to watch that really makes them start to question. And they begin to wonder, having them brainstorm options and ideas. Again, bringing in things like books that are highly visual that would be attractive to students.
The purpose of this book is to...
watching book trailers, watching short videos. Reading comics, as I said, from A Fish Without Life. Webbing information that I find from information graphics, other sources. Lots of information graphics on this topic that I can look at related to sustainable fishing, ocean, marine life. I can look at real life data that's been collected from NOAA. I start wiggling and thinking, but there's different perspectives. There's not just one. Well, that's what I want you to do during the wiggling phase, is to say that some people think this, but some people think this, and some people think that. Start creating diagrams that show what these different people think. What are the causes? What are the effects? What are different ways that I can put that information in? I start weaving and saying, but there's all these different organizations, which are trash and which are treasure. Which do I believe in, which don't I believe in? They're all great organizations, but they're great in different ways. They may not share my philosophies. I might not like some of the things that these organizations do, but I really like the things that these organizations do. Or that this particular organization I'm going to focus on because they focus on sustainable seafood, and that's where my real interest in this is. So having students really go narrow and more narrow in their focus, and then finally, who do I want to tell, and how can I share beyond just my classroom, in this case, a sustainable guide for fishing. Having students create their own graphic novels using something like Comic Life to share their understanding of sustainable practices. And then in the end, hoping that when they leave your school, that they'll download Seafood Watch and want to do that on their own, not just something that we do when we're in school. I hope you got some great ideas. Let me share my favorite find right now with you. The easiest way to create a video ever. You ready? It's called Google Search Stories. Okay, you have to have access to YouTube, so you might have to turn it on and turn it back off. But what it allows you to do is create a reflective piece on a project that you've done. So that project I just talked to you about sustainable fishing, and I went from concern about the oceans to the fishing and kind of back and forth. Here's the process of my searches. So I took my search words: marine life, ocean CO2, ocean acidification, I've got climate change, I've got sustainable fishing, seafood watch, and a world without fish. All I had to do was to type in those words and say, do I want to make it, what kind of a search I want to make it, and I end up with this really interesting reflection. This took me literally 5 minutes to make.
This does this for you.
It does it for you. You pick the audio. Is that cool? I mean, that's all there is to it. This is the website, youtube.com/searchstories. But isn't that a lot more fun than, at the end, I want you to write a page reflection on what you learned. I actually get to see the search terms that they did. So I could work with this child later and find out that they searched for things like fishing. I mean, they put in fish the first time, and they put fishing, and they put, I like to fish. Or, I mean, they put in things, and you're like, I don't think that they are getting this, you know? And I don't see their natural progression to where they went. And so it's kind of a nice, powerful way to show their search strategies. So I want you to think differently. I know we went a little bit over here. We'll take a break here in a few minutes. But there's many ways to see the world, and kids need to see all of them to really gain perspective. Challenge thinking. Kids have been seeing the monarch butterfly since they were in 2nd grade. By the time they get in high school, they need to be seeing something totally different rather than the everyday examples they see all the time. Take students out of the class through trips. We know we can't go on very many field trips anymore, but I can actually zoom in and see that with a virtual field trip. Think differently about how you present ideas. Use totally out-of-the-box kind of pictures to represent ideas. Look at the standards now with new eyes, and I really suggest in this next week, when this is fresh in your mind, go through your standards with whole new eyes. Every time it says share, communicate, convey that idea, how could you do that in a totally different way than you're used to thinking about students conveying ideas? I hope you got some good ideas, and for the next few hours, we're going to be thinking about this, but I know you're really like, right now. How many of you are feeling that way? Kind of, yeah. Well, that was the goal, because the goal was to try to really get you thinking about how you're teaching and how kids are learning. This will always be with you, so all those questions and all that, you can always go back and look at later. We're going to go ahead and take a break, and then when we come back from break,